All right. Thank you, Tapos, a lot for this introduction. I'll just take 10 seconds and then I will start. All right. All right. So, yes, as you all know, the title of my lecture is Eliot at the New Critical Turn of Literary Criticism. So, basically, this lecture will have three objectives. First, we will see the new criticism basically. First, what is this term? Specifically, the word new, which is very important to understand. And in the understanding of this new, what was new in this time of new criticism, we need to go back a little bit and understand the traditional criticism. Because if we are trying to understand what is new, what is new type of criticism that suddenly started at one point of time, then we need to understand what is this old type of criticism also, what is the traditional criticism that had been going on up to that point, right? Then only we will have a better understanding of what is this new type of change that came in the literary criticism. So the first, I will focus on criticism that had been going on up to this point, and then we will see what kind of role T.S. Eliot plays in this turn from traditional criticism to new criticism, because traditional had been going on up to this point in a different way, and suddenly we see that new criticism is something new. Critics of this time, they are actually looking at the text in a different way that had not been the case before this time. So the sudden turn in this literary criticism, we will try to understand Eliot, what kind of role does he play in this turn from traditional criticism to new criticism. All right. Now, for the understanding of this new type of criticism and what kind of influence Eliot had, we need to look at briefly what is traditional criticism and what had been going on in this traditional criticism for generations. All right. So briefly, we will look at traditional criticism in criticism in neoclassical times, criticism in romantic times. All right, and then we will see what kind of role Eliot is playing through his concept and through his criticism, and how he is influencing a section of a group of
critics to look at the criticism in a different way. All right. So we will go back to the time of neoclassical criticism. And when we talk about neoclassical times, the first very important literary figure that comes to our mind is Dryden, right? And we cannot understand Dryden or his literary production if we are not paying attention to his life, his biography, and what kind of role the socio-political situation of that time was playing a role in the shaping of his literary production. All right, because the time of Dryden was a very politically volatile situation in England. You remember the Civil War in England? That was the time of 1640s, right? In 1649, the Charles I, the king of that time, was beheaded, and there is this end of monarchy suddenly, abolition of the monarchy, and Oliver Cromwell becomes the head of the uh, Commonwealth. From 1649 to 1660, there is a period in English history that there was no king, and that is why this period is called interregnum period. Before 1649, there was king, monarchy. After 1660, there was monarchy. Only this 11-year period, there was no king. It is sandwiched between this period of 11 years, is sandwiched between the times of monarchy, and that is why this period is known as interregnum period. And Dryden published a very important
poem, heroic stanzas in dedication, in praising Oliver Cromwell. That means he was a supporter of Cromwell, right? Because he is dedicating a poem to him. Now there is a change of fortune in English history. In 1660, suddenly monarchy is restored. Monarch King Charles II returns and becomes king. And along with that, Dryden also switched side, switched his political allegiances. All right, just like some of our, at the time, today's time, we see that many intellectuals are supporting some party. Situation was same at that point of time also. You have heard about Cavaliers versus Roundheads, right? So Cavalier poets were the supporter of the king. Roundheads were the supporter of the, that Commonwealth. So Dryden immediately switched side as soon as the fortune of England changes, and he writes in praising the new king, Astria Redux, a new very important literature he dedicates. If we follow his religious life also, we will see in 1682, at that point of time, he was the supporter of Protestant church. He believed in Protestantism. So he dedicated a poem, very important poem, Religio Laici. 5 years later, again he switched side. Now he is a supporter of Roman Catholicism, and he writes one very important poem again, The Hind and the Panther. So if we analyze his life, we understand that his literary production cannot be judged properly if we are not paying attention to his life and what was happening, because his literary production has influences of these external factors, because he switched sides politically and in his religious life also, right? And that is reflected in his criticism also. An essay on dramatic poesy, the piece of literary work, piece of criticism that he produced. In that essay, we see there are four characters: Crites, Eugenius, Lycidius, and Neander. And these four important characters are actually talking about four important things. So Crites and Eugenius, they are having a debate, ancient drama versus modern drama. Crites is saying ancient drama is better, he has his reasons. And Eugenius is saying no, modern drama is better, and he has his reasons. Now, I am not going into detail of these things. And Lycidius and Neander, they are having a debate between French drama and English drama. Which one is better? Lycidius has his reasons why French drama is better, and Neander is defending. Now, here, two important points, very important points we need to look into, is that Lycidius has many problems why he considers that French drama is better than English drama. All right? But two important points that he is making towards the end of his argument is that French drama is blindly following the ancients. And since ancients were not showing the scene of death on the stage, and since they were not showing too violent scenes on the stage, they used to, you know, they used to narrate through chorus songs instead of showing it on the stage. So French drama is doing that. And Lycidius thinks that English drama at that point of time was showing this too much of violent scenes, and they were representing the scene of death also on the stage. And these had some corrupting influences on the audiences. It was in these scenes were corrupting the mind of the audiences. So that is why he thinks, Lycidius thinks that French drama is better than the English drama. But here, Neander is defending. Neander is basically here Dryden himself. Dryden is actually putting forward his own argument through this character Neander. And Dryden is telling, no, these violent scenes and scene of death, these are very relevant at that point of time, because what was happening at that point of time in the society? Society was going through a civil war. Every day, here and there, some group of people were suddenly attacking someone, as it happens in civil war. All right. So violence was happening all around in that at that point of time in the society, and people were dying. So it is very relevant to show these relevant events. Number one, and number two, these should be, very attractive to the audience also who are watching, because in their daily life, every day they are experiencing violence and death. Right. So Neander is telling that it is very relevant. Now, what is important is that the criticism, Dryden's criticism, he is more focused on these external factors, socio-political situations, rather than the text of that time, right? He's focusing on these external factors, how they are very important because that was happening in the society. Political situation was very volatile. So external factors are influencing not only his literary production but also his literary criticism. All right. And then tragicomedy he is defending. Now here also Lycidius is telling that tragedy and comedy was a two different genre during the ancient times, and French drama is maintaining that. And since English drama is actually they are mixing up this tragedy and comedy, he does not like that. And Neander is again defending. He is telling that our life is a mixture of tragedy and comedy. No one's life has only sadness, and no one's life has only happiness. It is a mixture of happiness and sadness. So it is very relevant to mix up this tragedy and comedy. So he is defending all these things. All right. But the main point is that external factors, sociopolitical situations, and Dryden's life, biographical information, these are actually influencing his literary production and his criticism. Now I will move forward and we will see Dr. Johnson's criticism. And here in his criticism of Shakespeare, he is actually looking at the criticism that had been happening at his time, and he is pointing out that there are some critics who actually evaluate the criteria. They are thinking, some critics are thinking that the criteria of judging the value of any author should always be excellence and not the antiquity. All right, antiquity means historical perceptions you need to know, not only the literary production of the writer. And some critics, according to Johnson's, there what they do is that they will judge the merit of an author by the worst book, the least important book that they are producing, as long as they are alive. And when these authors are dying, they will take the best production of the author and they will judge the value of the entire oeuvre of his work based on that one. Now, according to Dr. Johnson, both these approaches to criticism is approach of criticism. We need to take into account the antiquity and historical perspective. Not only that, but also we need to take into account all the literary production that they are making. All right. And one more thing, as long as he's talking about excellence, that the criteria of judging the excellence of someone should always focus on the length of the duration of the work, like how long their work remains relevant to the authors, and whether these authors, someone, whether they are able to, whether they are able to continue to generate esteem generation after generation. And by his judgment of Shakespeare, by these two criteria, he thinks that Shakespeare achieves. He taps into these two qualities because Shakespeare's works, he actually outlives his own century. Not only that, century after century, and his esteem, he continues to garner esteem more and more as time went by. So there is this universal appeal, universal truth is there. He's talking why Shakespeare is able to do that, because in his tragedy and all the characterization of his tragedy, the universal truth is there. If we one by one, if we look at Macbeth, ambition, King Lear's arrogance and pride, Hamlet's overthinking and depression, Othello's suspicions and insecurity. Now, these things, this raw human nature, every man has this. Not only people of his generation had, the next generation also had, even our generation, every man. In our surrounding, we see people who has ambition, who has pride, who has arrogance, or someone is suffering from depression, someone is insecure, suspicious about their partner or about their friends. So these raw human nature Shakespeare is actually representing in his writing, and that is why he is relevant in every ages, continues to garner esteem in every ages, and that is his works. The length of the duration of his work is very long because through his writing he is able to represent this raw human nature. Is characterized Jason is praised by Dr. Johnson because of their variety, all these various types of characters, the depth of the characterization, their credibility. They are very credible because this ambition, then pride, arrogance, we see in every man these things, right? So they are very credible characters, and they have this power of delighting the audience. Now, this very important quotation that he is making is that according to these characters, Shakespeare's characters, that they are the genuine progeny of common humanity, such as the world will always supply. Now, this type of character, basically, the people who are having arrogance, people who are having, ambition, people who are suffering from depression. Now, world always supply. If we observe, our observation will find this type of character in every generation, in every century. In the writing of other poets, a character is too often an individual. In those of Shakespeare, it's commonly a species. So he is actually judging the excellence of Shakespeare by his comparison with the excellence of other writers. So, in his criticism of Shakespeare, what are the things that he is focusing on, Dr. Johnson? He is focusing on the historical perspective, antiquity, and comparison, right? Rather than only the language of the text. Again, here, some external factors he is focusing on. Antiquity, he is judging the other writers, whether they are able to, generate same kind of passion centuries after centuries. Right. So focus is on the historical development, and they are comparing with other authors. Now, morality and didacticism in Dr. Johnson's works is very relevant because he believes he is actually criticizing Shakespeare here because he believes that Shakespeare's works has some corrupting elements which corrupts the audience's mind. Particularly, he is giving the example of King Lear. All of us know the story of King Lear, right? He had three daughters, and the last one is Cordelia. The first two is, I think, Goneril and Regan, and the last one is Cordelia. Cordelia remained true. Her love for King Lear remained true. She was genuine. She was a good character, right? And she should have been rewarded because of that. And the bad characters, okay, Regan and Goneril, should have been punished. But what happens in the end of King Lear? The good character Cordelia, who was taking care of King Lear, dies. And the bad characters who took advantage of King Lear, they are still alive. So what it is telling is that this, punishment of the bad characters are not happening, and the rewarding of the good characters are not happening. So it is actually giving a wrong kind of message. Right morality is not given to the audience. That is what he believes, Dr. Johnson believes. Now, why Dr. Johnson is so much aware about this, morality and didacticism? The purpose of literary work should be to teach some morality and impart some didacticism. Why? Because his own time, if we focus on, then we will see that England was going through a lot of changes. Social transformation was happening because of industrial revolution in the 18th century and 19th century, right? Cities were growing, and as cities were growing, crime rates were also increasing. Poverty was also increasing. Slum areas in the cities, you know, equal distribution of wealth. The gap between these was increasing. So all there was this erosion of morality in the society. All right. So that is why he believes that literature, since it is representing the true reality of life, it should impart some morality and didacticism. All right. And this concern of morality and ethical concern, we find in the criticism of ancient time also. If we are focusing on Plato's criticism, we will see he is actually very savagely criticizing the poetry. He believes that poets are liars and poetry creates a lie because they are distorting the reality. He believes, through imagination, they are creating something which does not exist in the world. And he has many other reasons why he is criticizing poetry, but couple of points he is making about the morality, in part, with how this poetry was corrupting the minds of the audience. Is that exactly same point he is making, that in literary work and even in the movies also, I'll give all of your young students, they will understand since you watch movies, you will understand that hero and villain will be there. Almost 80% of the movie, villain will be having good times, right? And heroes will be suffering. And every time these heroes are put into trouble, we, the audience, anger grows inside us, right? And in the end, there will be this win of the hero and this vice character, villain characters of villain will be punished. According to Plato, this actually gives a wrong message because people will believe that most of the time of my life I will have a good time if I am resorting to bad means. All right, and moreover, according to him, poetry actually gives some wrong message like in literature, classical epic literature, what do we see? That gods are revengeful, gods are taking revenge. Take the example of Paradise Lost. Saturn revolted against God. God took revenge, hurled him from heaven into the hell, punished him, along with his other, you know, other gods who actually supported Satan. And then other epic literature. Think about the situation of Aholla. Think about the situation of Medusa. Think about the situation of Surpanakha. From Greek mythology, think about the situation of Sisyphus. All of them have been punished by God. God took revenge on them. So, poetry is actually imparting a wrong message to the audience. It is corrupting the mind of the audience by saying that gods are taking revenge. And the characters, main characters, protagonists, the characters that audience likes, they will have a flaw, a tragic flaw. In Aristotle's criticism, you might have heard the word hamartia, the concept, right? These good characters will have one flaw, tragic flaw, which will bring tragedy in their life, right? Macbeth's tragic flaw is his ambition. Huh? King Lear's hamartia, the flaw is his pride, anger, arrogance. All right. So gods are taking revenge, and our heroes, they have flaws. So these wrong morality, like corrupting, there are some corrupting, influences in this poetry. That is what is Plato saying, and that is why he criticizes also. So here also we see Dr. Johnson. He is actually criticizing Shakespeare because of having some corrupting influence in his writing, and why he is so concerned? Because the if we are trying to find out that reason, then we have to focus onto the social transformation of England at that point of time, and how society was changing, how morality was waning because of this religion versus science, because of the development of science. People were making money, poverty was there, this gap of wealth was a gap was increasing. So because of this reason, he thinks that literature should impart some morality and didacticism. Now here again also, what Dr. Johnson is doing is that he is focusing on these external influences, socio-political situation, economic condition of his time, and based on that, he is making these points that morality and didacticism should be the purpose of any literature, right? So rather than focusing only on the text or the language of the text, they are this traditional criticism is focusing on these external influences, biographical information, socio-political situation, economic conditions. All right. I'll move forward a little bit and we will see the romantic criticism. There also, like when we are trying to find out what is romanticism, from where does the influence of romanticism come, specifically the romanticism in England. When we are trying to find out the reason from where does this influence come, we are looking at two very important political events that were happening elsewhere in Europe and in America, right? American Revolution in 1776, French Revolution in 1789. The slogan of a French Revolution: equality, fraternity, and liberty. So all these political events that were taking place somewhere else were romanticism in England. So again, here we are focusing on these external influences when we are trying to find out romanticism and this arrival of romanticism in British literature, right? And in the society also, If we pay attention again to the neoclassical times, we will see the society before this industrial revolution took place. Society was mainly consisted of two classes, upper classes and lower classes. Only after the industrial revolution took place, these lower classes, they actually came up the ladder of the social class, and there was this suddenly this emergence of the middle classes in the 18th and 19th century, right? So this class division was there, and there was this restriction in the field of literature also. In the neoclassical times, writers had to resort to some sort of, they could not write anything they wanted. They had to maintain some elevated language, some decorum, some restrictions in their writing, refinement, because they were focusing on a particular type of audience who were belonging from these upper classes, right? And only in the romantic times we will see, when we will be reading a preface to lyrical ballads, that Wordsworth and Coleridge are focusing more on these lower classes, working classes. They want to write something in the 1798, when they are publishing when they are publishing lyrical ballads, which consisted of 23 poems. They are publishing one advertisement along with that, and in that advertisement they are clearly mentioning that they are actually experimenting with a new type of language to find out whether the language of the lower classes or the working classes could be used for creative purposes, all right, for poetic creation. Now that advertisement they are giving because they are afraid of being severely criticized by the critics of that time, because they will be considered like they critics will consider that they are devaluing the quality of language, right? So they, and when their this lyrical ballads, publication of lyrical ballads was well received by these newly emerged middle classes, or these newly educated people, because the language was very simple, and this newly emerged first generation readers, they uh, they liked their writing, their language, their content. So they are now empowered, they are emboldened, and they actually extend this advertisement and make it a preface. And in this preface they are outlining, this preface is considered to be the manifesto of romanticism, and in that they are outlining what should be poetry, what are the qualities a poet needs to have, what should be the language of poetry, and what should be the subject matter of poetry. So specifically they are focusing on working classes, because they want to attract more readership. So here also we see that the focus is more on how they can address to this new readership, to these lower classes, to these working classes, by writing in their language, by writing about something which will reflect their lifestyle. All right. So they are focusing on these things, and in their preface they are writing what should be the quality of a poet, what are the qualities a poet needs to have, what should be poetry, and specifically is telling what should be this new type of poetry, that it should be spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, emotions recollected in tranquility, all these things. Then Thomas Love Peacock's Four Ages of Poetry. Here also we see he is actually trying to judge poetry in different ages, and he considers, he thinks that in his contemporary time, poets, specifically the romantic poets. Here, Thomas Love Peacock also is criticizing romantics, that they do not have any connection with the reality. All the time they are, through their imagination and emotion, they are creating a fairy land, and they are constricting themselves. They are remaining in that bubble, staying away from the reality of life, ignorantly. They are, they are bypassing the history, the situation of this situation of that time, socio-political situation, what was happening in the society. Deliberately they are staying away from that. Now Thomas Love Peacock is criticizing romantic poets because they are not paying attention to these external influences. You understand? So the main idea of this attack from Thomas Love Peacock is that romantic writers is not paying much attention to these external influences at times. They are busy in their own bubble. All right, so that is why it's criticized. All right, now we will see some of the important concepts of Eliot, and then we will move forward and see how new criticism was impacted by these concepts of Eliot, and what kind of differences do we find from, what are the differences between this traditional criticism and new criticism. So objective correlative, this concept of Eliot we find in Hamlet and his problems in this essay. Now Eliot thinks, all right, first I will explain what is objective correlative. Objective correlative basically is a set of events or chain of incidents that actually correlates someone's emotion or one character's emotion. A very simple example, if I give, then we have seen in our life that when someone is angry, instead of expressing their anger, what do they through words? What do? They will throw bottle. They will maybe punch into the wall, and we understand that they are angry without them telling us that they are angry, right? So this action or this set of events or this incident of punching the wall, throwing the water bottle, this actually correlates the person's emotion or emotional state. By seeing or observing this event or incident, we understand what they are going through in their mind, that they are angry. By looking at someone at times, we understand that they are sad, maybe, right? In the movies also, in the 90s movies and early 2000 movies, many times you have seen that, physical intimacy was not allowed in the movies, right? So what do the director do? You will see that two faces, maybe the hero and heroine, they will come forward. The moment they will come forward very close, very close to each other, the faces will be replaced by two flowers. Flowers will meet each other. Now, by looking at these flowers, we understand that they are having some intimacy or the moments of, intimacy. Now, these basically is objective correlative. So, these movies, they are also using this objective correlative. So, objective correlative basically a set of events or chain of incidents that correlate someone's or some character's emotional state, right? And Hamlet is much worked, researched literary work of Eliot. But according to Eliot, although this is very popular and highly successful, Eliot thinks that this is Shakespeare's artistic failure. Why does he think? He thinks that Hamlet, the character, is much bigger than the play itself. The other characters and other, the rest of the storyline, it is not fully developed because too much attention has been given to Hamlet, yet Shakespeare is unable to communicate his emotional state properly to the audiences because he does not find enough or appropriate objective correlative which will be able to communicate Hamlet's emotional state to the audience. All right. So that is why Eliot thinks that Hamlet, although it is very popular and highly successful, it is an artistic failure by Shakespeare. On the other hand, he is praising Macbeth because there are two very powerful scenes in Macbeth which communicate to the audience the emotional state of Lady Macbeth. First one is that hand washing scene, that Lady Macbeth is continuously washing her hands, trying to erase the blood stain. Although we, the audience or the readers, know that there is no blood in her hand because she did not commit the crime herself. But she thinks that there is a blood stain and all the perfumes of Arabia will not be able to sweeten her little hands, continuously washing her hands. And the other one is her sleepwalking scene. She is She cannot speak properly and she is walking in her sleep. Now, these two powerful scenes communicate the kind of emotional state or emotional trauma that this character is going through, these powerful scenes. So, these objective correlative, appropriate objective correlative is able to communicate, convey this emotional state of the character. All right, that is why he is praising Macbeth, but he is telling that Hamlet is an artistic failure. But the question is that Shakespeare, being the greatest literary figure, literary writer, why would he have to resort to objective correlative? He should have been able to generate the passion or emotion or emotional state of these characters through his language, through his writing, right? He is considered to be the greatest literary figure. Why can't he do that with language? Why does he have to resort to objective correlative? The question remains, right? So focus, Eliot's work is generating this question, that inability of generation of appropriate emotion through language, that is not there. Shakespeare cannot do that through language, right? Now, the second concept of Eliot is dissociation of sensibility. Now, this concept we find in another important essay, that is Metaphysical Poets. And here again, he is actually making a bold statement that once the metaphysical poets have left the scene, there has been a dissociation of sensibility in literary writing. There has been a devaluation. The quality has gone down of in British poetry after these metaphysical poets have left the scene. Now we need to understand here metaphysical poets, what they were writing, what is metaphysical poetry, what are the important things that they were putting in their writing. Why does Eliot think that they were writing ideal kind of poetry? Why does he think that once they have left the scene, there has been a devaluation of poetry? The quality of poetry has gone down during the neoclassical times and romantic times, uh, even after romantic poets. Metaphysical poets were using concepts, powerful concepts, right? What is concept? Far-fetched imagery, abstract far-fetched imagery, right? And this far-fetched imagery, this abstract far-fetched imagery is possible because these poets were very intellectual, right? Because through this conceit, they are actually conveying their intellectual thoughts, right? Some example, if we see dance, a valediction forbidding morning, we will see a conceit of compass. Is using this imagery symbol of compass and comparing two lovers with the compass. Geometrical compass, all of us know that it has two legs and they are joined on the top, right? One remains static and the other one rotates. So he is actually comparing him and the lady love and their love, the bondage of their love along with this compass. Just like these two legs of this compass, these lovers, they are separate bodies, but their souls are attached. He's telling, although I might not be here along with you all the time, I might be, going around the world. I will be rotating. I will be going around. You will be here. But our souls will be attached. All right. At the end of the circle, I will come back to you. So he is comparing, the bond of love with this imagery of compass. Then another poem by Donne, The Flea. There also, one mosquito is biting you know, biting the lover and then goes on to bite the lady love. The moment lady love is trying to kill that mosquito, the man is telling, do not kill that. Why? Because he is telling that although here the concept of blood and marriage, using this imagery of, blood and marriage, that although we are not married, although the union of our blood has not happened, but there is union of our blood happening inside that mosquito, because mosquito has bitten me and mosquito has bitten you. It's our blood. All right. So this far-fetched abstract imageries they are using. So the unification of sensibility they had in their writing, right? Intellectual thought, and they were generating emotion with their, language. But if we analyze the poetry of the next generation, which is neoclassical times, we will see that they are focusing only on one aspect of these two important aspects, which Eliot is mentioning. Neoclassical writers are focusing more on this intellectual part, intellectual thought. They are completely ignoring the emotional part. And the next generation, that is the romantic poets, what are they doing? They are completely ignoring this intellectual part. They are devaluing the language, focusing more on the emotional part, right? So metaphysical poets, they were focusing on these two aspects: thought, intellectual thought, and emotional feelings. And that is why they were able to create great work of art. But the next generations, they are neoclassicals are focusing only one aspect, which is intellectual part, and the romantics are focusing only on the emotional part. And that is why he thinks that their quality of writing does not match the intellect, quality of the metaphysical poets. So that is why he thinks that there has been a dissociation of sensibility once these metaphysical poets have left the scene. All right. And the third important theory of Eliot is theory of impersonality, and this theory we find in his essay, Tradition and Individual Talent. All right. Here he is talking about the objectivity, objective writing. You know, the focus of the poet should be on the objectivity. His emotions and passions must be depersonalized. Basically, here he is actually criticizing the romantic poets, because Wordsworth, you remember, in lyrical ballads, preface to lyrical ballads, he is telling that poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. You see a beautiful scene, beautiful building, beautiful waterfall, you are overcharged with emotions, and poetry comes out from you. You are writing from your heart, right? But here he is telling that poets must maintain a level of objectivity. Poets must be as impersonal and objective as a scientist. Poets' personality should act only as a medium, having the same influence as a catalyst agent in a chemical reaction. All right. So he will help in the great production, in the production of a great work, but his personality will not interfere with its production. He must maintain must maintain this depersonalization in his pursuit of creation of great work. All right. Honest criticism and sensitive appreciation is directed not upon the poet but upon the poetry. So clearly he is making this, creating this difference between the poet and the poetry. And in this production of poetry, poet must maintain some objectivity, must remain a little bit far away from the, must not mix his emotion and passion all the time with the creation of poetry. So he is basically criticizing this romantic subjectivism, because according to these romantics, poetry is a turning loose of emotion. You see a beautiful scenery, beautiful waterfall, emotion will flow out of you in the form of poetry, right? So poetry is not a turning loose of emotion, but an escape from emotion. It is not the expression of the personality, but an escape from personality. According to him, he is actually writing about this depersonalization in his tradition and individual talent. He does not completely denying that like that there should not be any involvement of emotion, but poet must depersonalize his own self. And this influence we find in Eliot's poetry writing also. If we focus on this poetry, Prufrock, Alfred Prufrock, we will see We will, in the beginning, we do not understand who is speaking. Is it Prufrock or the poet? Right. So there is this distance between, he is actually distancing the self. Poet should not mix his emotional too much. All right. There should be an extension of his personality. So in this, or in all his concepts, by analyzing all his concepts, you can understand that the traditional criticism, what it was doing, it was focusing too much on the external factors, biographical information, socio-political situation, economic condition of the society, right? Whether poetry is imparting some morality or not. Now, in these concepts of Eliot, what do we see? That there is a subtle shift towards language, focus on the language. Think about objective correlative. Objective correlative, he is talking about the inability of Shakespeare to convey the emotional state of Hamlet through language. And even Lady Macbeth, he is using objective correlative to generate, you know, to convey the emotional state. But he is unable to do that with the language. But being a greatest literary figure, he should have been through language, right? And then metaphysical in dissociation of sensibility also, he thinks that metaphysical poets were writing better poetry than the neoclassical and romantics because they were using their language to generate their emotion to passion and to convey their emotional to their intellectual thought, right? So the of the language is there in his work, which new critics of the new criticism, they are taking leaf out of his page and they are propagating that the criticism should not take into account much biographical information of the author, author's intention, socio-political situation, economic condition. Rather, the criticism should only focus on the individual text. Text is there, and the formal elements of the text like imagery, irony, paradox, ambiguity, these elements, formal elements, should be interpreted, should be analyzed, and the meaning of the poem should be interpreted. Author's intention, author's biography, these things should not be given much importance. All right. And some of the important works. See, William mentioned seven types of ambiguity, focusing on ambiguity and what kind of role does it play in meaning generation, in the generation of meaning, right? Client Brooks, The Well-Wrought Urn, is focusing on the paradox, importance of paradox. The language of poetry is the language of paradox. The kind of importance paradox has. What is paradox? Paradox basically contradictory ideas, right? Like there is a song, Sound of Silence. Many of you must have heard, right? Now, what is the meaning of silence? Silence means there should not be any sound. But what is the phrase? Sound of silence. Silence conveys that there should not be any sounds, but we are reading that there is a sound of silence itself. So this is contradictory idea, right? This is paradox basically. So paradox is needed in poetry, and he is drawing comparison with the language of science. Language of poetry is different from the language of science. Why? Because the language of science does not include all these formal elements, specifically paradox. What does this language of science? They basically describe the process of experimentation, the result of experimentation, these things. And these texts are not enjoyable to read. We do not get any pleasure by reading all these things, right? On the other hand, the language of poetry generates pleasure. Now why do we get pleasure? Because because of this existence of these formal elements, because of metaphor, ambiguity, paradox, all these things are there. All right, so paradox is very important in the poetry writing. Wimsatt and Beardsley's intentional fallacy. Here also they are talking about two important concepts, intentional fallacy and affective fallacy. Intentional fallacy, if we are focusing too much on the biographical elements, biographical information, author's intention, why author wrote, like the first one I discussed, Dryden, right? If we are trying to understand Dryden's work, then we have to understand his biographical information, his biography, his time, socio-political situation of his time. So all these things we have to understand, right? And why he actually attacks in Max Flecknoe to Sadwell. So in order to understand Max Flecknoe, we need to understand some other biographical information, political situations, his political affiliations, all those things, right? So Wimsatt and Beardsley is telling that generally readers, they interpret the text based on their experiences, based on their surrounding. They never go back to understand why Shakespeare or why some other writer wrote that in his time, right? So it is futile to go back to find out the intention of the author. All right, if we are doing that, then we are making a fallacy, we are making a mistake in the evaluation of the word, and that is intentional fallacy. And the other one is affective fallacy. We should not pay much attention to the reader's response also. That every time we watch a movie, we think that this is the great movie that I have watched. This is the best movie I have watched. Next movie you will watch again, you will think this is the best movie. Because at that point of time, you are overcharged with the emotion of the movie. So it look, so that is what is telling that if we are focusing too much on the reader's response also, then also we are making a fallacy. So what do we need to do? We need to keep all these external influences, author's intention, author's biography, socio-political situation, reader's response, and objectively we need to interpret the text based on the language that is available on the text, by interpreting different formal elements that is available in the text. All right, so we can see that there is a stark change. Traditional criticism was focusing on these external influences, and new criticism is completely ignoring all these external influences, and they are completely focusing on the close reading of the text. Meaning is there, it is self-contained, right? Now in this turn, we can understand that Eliot's concepts play a major role, right? Because he shows some different way of criticism. All right, all right. That is my lecture. That is all. I will finish complete here. I will stop here.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, sir.
Uh, my name is Prabhat, and I have a doubt on one point. Uh, Eliot is saying that writing is actually escape from, actually, poetry is escape from emotion. Uh, and this was a reply to Wordsworth's concept that it is overflow of emotion. And by saying this, Eliot is actually saying that actually depersonalizing the authority of author. So my doubt is that can I say that Roland Barthes, uh, his concept of the death of author, is just an extension of Eliot's point of view? And if not, then how it is different than his concepts of personalization of author?
Yes, very good, Prabhat.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, exactly. That is what is my lecture, right? That Eliot is someone who is actually helping to change the course of criticism, right? Focus was not much on the language, focus was much on the external influences, right? And because of some of his concepts, these later critics, some of the American critics, and Rolla Barthes, the death of the authors, there also we will find some traces of intentional fallacy, right? That we should not focus much on the author's intention. Authors has written the work and that is the end of his story. Now it is in the domain of the readers. It is in the public domain. Now readers will interpret based on their understanding of the society, based on their experiences, right? If I give you one example, a very simple example, like many a times we find some sad songs, when you are sad you think certain type of song is that is the best song I have heard. Now that very song will not remain best when you are going through some other emotion, maybe when you are very happy, in a celebration mood, right? So you are interpreting that particular song based on your experience, based on your understanding, based on your perception of that time. You are not going back to Sydney's time to understand why he wrote Astrophel and Stella. You are not interpreting that text by his emotion. You are imagining your lady love, maybe someone you love, and you are picturing someone else's face when you are trying to understand a love song. Amoretti, Spencer wrote because of his own experiences, right? Now you are interpreting that same poem not by his emotion but by your emotion, your understanding, your experiences, your surrounding, right? So author has written the text and that is the end of his story. That is why the concept is the death of the author. Now it is in the domain of the readers, and that is the extension of the intentional fallacy, you can say, basically.
Hello.
Yes.
Thank you,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. I am Tanmay Rajvanshi.
Yes. Yes.
Sir, I'd like to ask you a question.
Yes.
Hello. Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Yes. I can hear you.
Sir,
Yes.
so far as Wimsatt and Beardsley's opinion is concerned, now when we judge a literary text on the basis of the emotion that it produces in us, so and fallacy
Excuse me.
occurs. This is,
Excuse me. Could you please repeat one more time from the beginning?
I mean, when we judge a literary work
Hmm.
on the basis of the emotion
Hmm.
that it produces in us, a fallacy occurs that is called affective fallacy.
Affect. Yes.
Yes, sir. But sir, if we do not, judge a literary work on the basis of the emotion that it produces in us, so what should be the criteria of judging a literary work? So why do you say that a play written by Shakespeare is a great literary work, and a play written by an ordinary man is not a great literary work? So how to distinguish between great literary work and a literary work which is not a great literary work?
All right. Yes. So very good question. The second question I will answer first. How do
Yes,
we
sir.
judge that? Yes. How do we judge that Shakespeare is still relevant and his works are great works? Because of this universal appeal of his characterization, right? His
Yes, sir.
characters are universal characters. The
Yes.
qualities that he imparts in his characters, we find in every man. Macbeth's ambition we find in our surrounding. We know people in our surrounding, they have ambition, right?
Yes, sir.
King Lear's pride, King Lear's arrogance, you know, Hamlet's
Yes, sir.
depression, Hamlet's depression and dilemma, and Othello's insecurity,
Yes.
suspicions,
Yes.
all these things, these are universal characters. So that is why, because of these, great characterization, depth of the characters, and universal appeal of these characters, we consider that his work is great. All right. Now
Okay.
that does not mean that any other work will not be great. And the second one is that immediately based on the reader's response, if you are trying to judge the merit of the work, then we are making a fallacy. Why? Because you yourself know every time you read a novel, you watch a movie, at that point of time you are overcharged with emotion. Now the
Yes.
kind of feeling that you have about the movie or the novel at that point of time, same effect might not be there after 1 month or 2 months, right? So if we are
Yes.
judging the merit of the work based on our, if that involvement, too much involvement is there in the in the process of judgment, then we are being subjective. We are not looking at the merit of the work in an objective way. That is the main point here of Eliot, that we need to depersonalize. We need to look at the text in an objective way. But these romantic writers were doing this exactly opposite. They were involving their own personality too much, right?
Okay, sir.
Understand?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Thank
yes,
you,
yes,
sir.
yes.
Good evening, sir.
Yes, yes, I can hear you.
I'm Ganga. Do you have any idea in your own perspective, Eliot as a deconstructionalist?
Eliot is deconstruct. This is very, that's a very, stimulating question. All
Thank you
right.
so much.
So basically, see, in the lecture also, I have basically tried to show the traditional criticism what had been going on, right?
Yes, sir.
And when he is actually saying about Macbeth or Hamlet, that objective correlative, I think he is actually deconstructing this traditional, way of looking at criticism. But I
Yeah,
am not
sure,
so
sir.
sure about it. But it's a very good question that you have raised. I will look into it.
Yeah, sir, actually, we can think about it. Yes, actually, you answered it already very well that T.S. Eliot deconstructed the way traditional criticism looked at the texts. Yeah, that is there. Actually, yeah, I was having another question, but I may go off the track. But while you were discussing about depersonalization in art by T.S. Eliot's theorization, I was thinking about Brechtian theater. So I don't know how much it can be relevant, though your talk is not in this line, but still it reminds me of Brechtian distancing effect. So, sir, can you stretch a line between Eliot's depersonalization with that of Brechtian distancing? Because they may appear similar to some extent. So, what is your take on this?
Devasi sir, very honestly, I do not have much knowledge about Brechtian theater. So if you could enlighten us, it would be, I think,
No, no,
very,
it
very
just
yes.
suddenly, strikes in mind.
Yes, yes.
So, yeah, because Brechtian theater also talks about the dissociation of some kind of sensibility, that this is not the reality, this is staged reality, and you should be critical of what is going on. Unlike Aristotelian way of identifying, emotions with the characters that are happening on the stage. So on that line, it just reminds me. So yeah, maybe that can be another alternative way to look at the text. So that's this much.
All right, all right. Thank you very much for this, because I do not have much knowledge about it, but I will look into it. Thank you for this
Yes, sir.
question.
Thank you so much, sir, for your illuminating lecture.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Hmm.
I hope I'm audible now.
Yes, yes,
Hello.
yes, we can hear you.
Okay. First of all, let me thank Professor Ghosh, who has given a very extensive lecture and it was very informative. Since Professor Ghosh has started from the starting to end and he has differentiated how old criticism is different from, or like new criticism is different from old criticism. In this regard, Professor Ghosh has talked about T.S. Eliot, especially he has focused on T.S. Eliot, but he has taken reference from all the possible aspects of literary criticism. For example, he has quoted the Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, Preludes, Boston's Evening Transcript, Wasteland, and also along with the important autotelic test, theory of impersonality, objective correlative, many things has been quoted. I cannot take all the points because since everyone has joined, everyone has listened to Professor Ghosh seriously, and of course there were some important questions like Professor Devashish has also marked a question on. He tried to get the answer of the differentiation between Brechtian theater and other traditional critique. Thank you, Professor Ghosh, for your extensive lecture. And then in next, I would like to thanks Tapas Sarkar, who is my colleague and also the convener of this program, who is really working very hard to make this lecture happen. Thanks a lot to Tapas Sarkar as well. And most of the things that any event has always gets success with its participation. So, of course, I'd like to thank all the participants who have been listening to Professor Ghosh and participating in the question and answer session since the beginning. We have been connected to one another since last 1 hour and 15 minutes. So, thanks all the participants. We hope we'll meet soon with another lecture by another professor or another research scholar on a very illuminating topic. Thank you. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot for this opportunity. And yeah, take care. Stay well, all of you.
Thank you. Thank you.